All right, so today we're really diving deep into this whole hyper-personalization thing with AI, like how those ads always seem to know exactly what you're thinking about buying.
Yeah, it's pretty wild.
It really is. So to help us unpack all of this, we're looking at the work of Kamyar Shah.
Right, he's that business consultant.
Exactly. He's worked across a bunch of industries, e-commerce, even medicine, so he's seen firsthand how AI is changing the game when it comes to personalization.
And it's definitely not just about basic recommendations anymore. We're talking next level tailored experiences, and get this, all in real time.
It's like having a personal shopper who can read your mind, or at least predict what you'll want before you even know it. That's where these real-time personalization algorithms come in, right?
Yeah, exactly. They're making lightning fast decisions based on tons of data. One way they do this is with deep reinforcement learning, kind of like training a digital assistant by trial and error.
So the AI is constantly learning and adapting to your preferences as it goes.
Exactly. Just like a stockbroker adjusts their strategy based on how the market's doing.
That's another one of those approaches, right?
Yep, online learning algorithms, they're always evolving, but it
Yeah.
gets even more interesting. There's also transfer learning, where AI takes what it's learned in one area and applies it to something totally different.
So, like, if a chess master decided to learn poker, they'd probably pick it up pretty quickly because they already have that strategic mindset.
Exactly, they're able to transfer those skills.
Wow, that's pretty amazing. But even with these incredible algorithms, they need something to actually work with, right? Like all that data you mentioned.
Oh, absolutely. Algorithms are like the engine, and data is the fuel. And we're not just talking about checking a box that says you like documentaries on Netflix. It's way more complex than that.
So it's less about what we say we like and
What?
more about how we actually behave.
Exactly. Your actions, like if you binge watch an entire season of something in one sitting, that tells the AI a lot more than you just saying you like that show.
Right. Actions speak louder than words. And I'm guessing it even takes into account things like what time of day it is or what day of the week.
You got it. Context is key. What you're in the mood for on a Friday night might be totally different from your Monday morning routine.
Makes sense. So my weekend guilty pleasures are safe for now, but are they also factoring in what my friends are watching?
You're totally on the right track. It's called the wisdom of the crowd. If a bunch of your friends who also love documentaries are all raving about a new nature show, the AI picks up on that and figures you might enjoy it too.
Wow. Okay, so that's a lot of data to process. How does AI even begin to make sense of it all? It seems incredibly complicated, like finding a needle in a haystack.
Right. And that's the tricky part, figuring out what all this data actually means. One big piece of that is data fusion. It's all about combining different types of data in the right amounts, kind of like a recipe.
Okay, I see that. Too much of one thing could throw the whole thing off.
Absolutely. Then there's feature engineering, which is about uncovering hidden patterns in the data, like a detective piecing together clues to solve a case.
So they're looking for those subtle connections, right? Those aha moments.
Exactly. And then we have temporal modeling, which focuses on how our tastes change as we get older. I mean, you probably don't listen to the same music you did when you were a teenager, right?
Definitely not. But it's kind of scary to think that AI remembers all of that, all those phases we might have forgotten about.
It's pretty incredible. And we haven't even gotten to the more advanced stuff like graph neural networks, attention mechanisms, and multimodal learning. But the takeaway is AI is getting really good at understanding us on a much deeper level.
Yeah, and it makes you wonder about, like, the privacy implications of all this.
You're
If AI knows that much about us, doesn't that ring some alarm bells?
right. That's a huge part of this whole hyper-personalization thing. I mean, we're talking about mountains of data, so privacy concerns are definitely up there.
It's got to be a balancing act, right? Like, how do we get those super personalized experiences without, like, giving up all our privacy?
Exactly. And luckily, people are working on some really cool AI methods that put privacy front and center.
So it's not just about personalization at any cost.
No, not at all. One thing that's showing a lot of promise is this thing called federated learning.
Federated learning.
It's kind of like, imagine you're trying to figure out a recipe, but you can't actually see it written down.
Okay, I think I'm following.
So you can kind of pick up on ingredients and stuff just by watching someone cook and tasting the final dish, but you never actually lay eyes on that recipe itself.
That's a good analogy.
That's federated learning in a nutshell. The AI learns from data that's spread out across tons of different devices, but it never actually sees your personal info directly.
So it's like learning without seeing. That's pretty wild. What else are researchers doing to tackle these privacy concerns?
Another method is differential privacy, which is like imagine trying to camouflage soldiers in a thick forest.
Oh.
By adding in some randomness, some noise to the data, you can mask individual identities, but you can still see the overall patterns.
So it's like blurring out faces in a photo, right?
Mhm.
You can still tell what's going on in the picture, but you can't make out who's who.
You got it. That's the idea. And then you've got homomorphic encryption, which is where data gets processed while it's still encrypted.
Encrypted.
Yeah, it's like solving a jigsaw puzzle, but all the pieces are flipped over. You can still put it together without ever seeing the full picture on the box.
That's a trip. So we're talking about some really innovative stuff here. It seems like the future of this whole hyper-personalization thing hinges on finding that sweet spot between, like, awesome tailored experiences and keeping our data safe, wouldn't you say?
Totally. It's a tough line to walk for sure, but the good news is that companies and researchers are taking this really seriously. They know what's at stake.
So where do we go from here? What's next for hyper-personalization?
The million-dollar question. I mean, there's a ton of potential, but there are still some big challenges to overcome. One of the biggest ones is scalability.
Scalability.
Right. Right now, these AI models are great at personalizing stuff for thousands, even millions of users. But what happens when we're talking about billions?
Yeah, that's a whole other level.
Exactly. It's like the difference between planning a dinner party and organizing the Olympics.
Right.
That's a good way to put it.
And then there's this thing called the cold start problem.
Mm-hmm.
How do you personalize for someone who's brand new, someone you have almost zero data on?
It's like recommending a book to someone who's never read anything in their life,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
You're like, where do you even start?
Right. It's a real head scratcher.
And those are just a couple of the challenges, huh?
Yeah, and it's what makes this whole field so exciting. But even with those hurdles, I'm optimistic.
Optimistic.
Oh, yeah. I think hyper-personalization has the potential to totally revolutionize how we use tech.
It's like we're on the cusp of something huge, like back when the internet first started.
Totally. So much potential.
But we got to be careful, right?
Absolutely.
It's not just about how we do this, but why, and even should we. You nailed it. And that's what's so great about this conversation. Like, it's not enough to just get the tech right.
We've got to be mindful of the bigger picture.
Exactly.
Well, today, we've really gotten into the nitty-gritty of these algorithms, and I got to say, they kind of feel like magic sometimes.
Right.
But they're using all that data to create these hyper-personalized experiences, and that's where the privacy question comes in, making sure that's being handled responsibly.
100%.
And we've also talked about what the future holds for all of this, scaling it up, figuring out the cold start problem, and most importantly, making sure it's all done ethically.
All super important stuff.
And Kamyar Shah's work is really helping to shed light on this whole evolving landscape. But it seems like AI is changing the game so quickly.
It really is.
It makes you wonder, are we giving up control? Or is this actually giving us more control?
That's the big question, isn't it? It's like any powerful tool, right? It's up to us to decide how it gets used.
So make sure it's a force for good.
Exactly.
So as you go out there and think more about hyper-personalization, think about this. What would it be like if technology just adapted to us, to each of us individually?
That's the dream, right?
Imagine your devices would just know what you need, your preferences. It would make life so much easier and open up possibilities we haven't even imagined.
I like the way you think.
That's the promise of hyper-personalization. But we have to ask ourselves, how do we make sure it serves us, that it makes our lives better without compromising who we are?
It's a question worth pondering.
It's something to keep in mind as we keep exploring this amazing and sometimes unnerving new world.